I think what would be useful is to start by hearing a little bit about Dragonfly Editorial and the
Yeah,
work that you do, some of the services you provide, who you work with, things like that.
sure. So, so I am the president and founder of Dragonfly Editorial. So this is a content agency that I started way back in 2005. And at that point, I didn't know it was going to be a content agency, nor did I probably even know what that word meant. I started out my career as a copy editor.
Which word, agency or content or both?
Probably both, but especially content.
Yeah, I know the feeling.
My grand dream was to be a freelance copy editor, and gosh darn it, that's what I was. But then I kept getting bigger jobs and more jobs, and people started asking me to write stuff because if you can edit, you can also write. Why not? And so we just evolved and grew over the years until now, almost 20 years later, we are I guess what I would call a full service content creation agency. We're not a marketing firm. We're not an advertising agency. So we're not going to create your next strategic communications plan to take over the world. But once somebody else creates your strategic communications plan to take over the world, and they decide everything that needs to be written and everything that needs to be designed, we're going to give you the horsepower to create that stuff. So we're the horses in the content scenario.
I notice it on your website to that point. You use the word outsource a lot. Like, we're your outsourced content creation team.
Yeah.
How do you outsource content? Our agency primarily does design and development, so we kind of lean more into the technical and software side of things. And outsourcing has some stuff attached to it that sometimes is good and sometimes is bad.
Yeah.
I mean, you're using this word in a content creation context, and obviously it's working. I'm just curious, how do people interpret that in a content sense?
Sure. Well, I'll tell you, Todd, our target customers that we work with are large or enterprise size B2B companies. So these are, big companies, think like PwC on the finance side, Intuit on the finance side. And they have a need in-house to produce a lot of content. So they're creating annual reports, industry reports, case studies, fact sheets, thought leadership blogs, email newsletter campaigns, website landing pages, all of this stuff. So what I have observed over the years, and this is very interesting to me, is even very large companies seem to carry a very small writing staff and very small editorial staff. In other words, people who might be copy editors, proofreaders, fact checkers, and so forth. So even like a big company that has like a global brand, maybe multinational company with a global brand office, and they have like 2 writers. Now, they may have writers here and there in field offices around the world, but for whatever reason, it seems to me that the economics of that internal in-house communications world means that they carry a small staff. So therefore, they need people like Dragonfly, other freelance writers, to pick up the burden of writing all the stuff that they need to write.
Right.
And the things that they do write in-house, editing all the stuff that they write in-house. So that's where the word outsourcing comes into play for me, because it's truly that in the purest sense of the word. Companies don't carry that editorial staff in-house, presumably to reduce their headcount, to reduce their internal costs. And so therefore they need a partner that they can throw work over the fence to on an ongoing basis, whether because they're super busy at a given time, whether something like creating an annual report is such a huge lift, like you can't give it to somebody in-house because that would take up their whole year. Creating an annual report could be like a 6-month project. Or perhaps there's something very specialized that needs to be written, that they need somebody who is more of a subject matter expert in that field, that they're in-house, who are like super duper brilliant general all-purpose marketers or content creation people, but they don't know about the rental industry in Pakistan, which is something that we've written about before, or the diamond industry in Russia, or luxury goods in China. Like the stuff we write about gets real specific, like real niche.
And do you handle all of the research and the topic creation around that, or is that are you receiving a lot of guidance from the marketing strategy and marketing teams to produce specific things?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we do very little of coming up with topics. Most of the people who we work with are researchers or subject matter experts within their own company. And they have, let's say, done a study, created some novel research around, let's say, real estate trends in Pakistan. So they have put together, let's say, a slide deck with 60 different slides with facts, figures, everything that they've learned about this topic over doing a big 6-month study. Now they need somebody to turn that into something that regular people can understand.
Right.
Can I take all that research and all our findings and turn it into a white paper? Now, can you turn that white paper into 3 or 4 blogs we might use to promote our white paper? And now can you also turn that into 10 or 20 social media posts that we can use to promote all of the above? So that's the work that we do, is really helping people. The people we work with already know what they want to say. They just need help getting it onto paper, or electronic paper, as the case is now.
And making it make sense, and making it engaging, and
making it make sense,
impactful.
and making it be engaging and compelling. Yeah, because the people we work with aren't copywriters. They're experts in medical device manufacturing, or bridge building, engineering, or something like that. So we help them. I like to think of it as we help people take their brilliance and let it shine on paper, or turn their brilliant concepts into words, I guess you could say.
So one of the techniques you use is these subject matter experts preparing documents and statistics and trends and analyses and things like that, and that's kind of the raw material. Do you ever also employ other tactics like interview techniques in trying to draw this information out of subject matter experts, and what other kinds of techniques do you use to get that stuff, that raw material that can then be turned into compelling content?
Yeah, I would say there's hardly anything that we write that does not also involve a subject matter interview. And so, that in and of itself is an art and a science. Preparing for the interview, so you're not walking in cold, asking somebody questions that they've already answered 1,000,000 times, and you could find out if you just looked on Wikipedia. So a baseline is doing your own research, so you are prepared for the subject matter interview. So you're asking them novel or relevant questions, getting the most out of their time. Just being able to set somebody at ease, just as you might in a conversation that you had at a party. You wouldn't just go right at somebody and be like, so tell me about your career and what are your goals over the next 5 years?
Right.
You might be like, oh my gosh, it's, so nice.
That's a fun guest at a party.
I can't believe we had such nice weather. And, then you would, once you feel that the conversation is at a natural point, then you can start asking some basic questions and then maybe build up to more trickier or challenging questions.
what other kinds of interview techniques do you employ? So, building up to trickier questions, presenting this more as a conversation, not just having, not a checklist of questions that you're going after that just have factual responses. What other kinds of techniques do you use to create an interview that draws compelling raw content out of somebody that can then be turned into something that you create?
Yeah. So I think there's three things that are actually real key to that. The first one is pretty obvious: ask open-ended questions rather than yes or no questions. So let's take what we're doing right now, for example. I might say something like, hey, Todd, tell me about this podcast that you're creating.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's just open-ended, like, tell me about this. And actually those words, tell me about X, Y, or Z, are great words. Those are so useful in so many situations. Next time you're having a fight with your kids or your spouse, say, tell me about what's making you upset in this situation. It's like a really non-threatening and inviting and really truly open-ended. It's saying, I want to hear about this.
I wonder how much crossover there is between therapy and counseling techniques and interview, because that is such a therapy question.
Yes. I
Tell
think
me
that's a
about
great
this.
point.
How does that make you feel?
Yeah. So open-ended questions, tell me about this. Silence is huge. Ask somebody a question, let them answer.
That shows up a lot in management technique and training. So in people management, whether it's having to deliver difficult news or having a difficult conversation with somebody about their work or their career or about something that happened in a professional context or whatever, I personally challenged with I'm personally challenged by silence.
Yeah.
And it's awkward, right? Especially when you're in the middle of doing something kind of difficult. But I found that the very best information, like the most valuable stuff, always comes right after that awkward pause, because it's I guess cynically you can look at it like, there are these sales techniques that are out there, and I'm probably, I'm definitely misquoting this or I'm misinterpreting this, but one of those really kind of skeezy sales techniques that I've heard is like, whoever speaks first loses.
Oh Lord.
But there's what right? But there is a little bit of truth to that. Like let's look at that on the positive side of things. Like if you're trying to get good information from somebody and you're trying to get somebody to engage, if you step in for them, right? And resolve the awkwardness or the difficulty of that silence and not allow them the opportunity to speak their mind about whatever, or even if you have to kind of stumble through a few sentences and they're not really going anywhere, but maybe the third or the fourth thing that you say, actually you start to develop momentum and all of that, like you have interrupted that process. So there is a lot of truth to that. So that's the second thing for interviewing, right?
Yeah.
Silence.
Yeah. And then kind of a follow-on to silence is simply saying, after you ask a question, somebody answers you, and then simply saying, what else? Those are also two really simple, powerful words. And it's kind of what you're saying, Todd. Often what comes after the what else, that's when you're really getting at the nugget or the most interesting or deeper part of what they might have to say about a topic. Because like they already gave you the obvious answer first. And so it's just giving them the space to think a little bit more and permission to think a little bit more.
And permission to go on some kind of a tangent as well.
Exactly, yeah, because that's
there's
where
also such a reluctance to do that.
That's where you get the really cool stuff.
Yes, so true. So those are some of the key things for interviewing. Ask open-ended questions, embrace the silence, ask what else, so continue to sort of prompt. So what else? works? What else works
my
to
gosh, you're
create a
throwing
good
it back at
interview?
me.
Like,
Um,
well,
I
for
mean,
example, I'm not trying to be cheeky, but like the setting of the interview, how you kind of frame it, things like what are some
yeah,
other things that really work to draw that good content out of somebody?
sure. Um, I mean, it's more rare nowadays, at least in our work. In journalism, you might be meeting people more face to face. In our work, almost all of our interviews are over Zoom or, over whatever. So a general principle is to meet somebody in a location that's comfortable and private, maybe not private like a hotel room, that would be creepy, but private like a quieter corner of a coffee shop,
Mm-hmm.
more private, or maybe a quiet corner of a hotel lobby or something where, the person can it feels cozy, it feels relaxed, it feels private. That's not an issue, obviously, on Zoom or, our B2B type calls. But, this is like the cheesiest thing ever, but I am a huge believer in smiling at people and eye contact. I think you cannot help but some part of you smiles back when somebody
Mm-hmm.
smiles at you. So I will often just like sit on Zoom calls, literally, I have to get away from my microphone.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep.
I will literally sit on Zoom calls with my hands on my chin, kind of looking like Pollyanna, just giving somebody a giant smile and giving them my undivided attention.
Right.
That's also super important in an interview situation, is giving that person your undivided attention. How rarely do we get that in any aspect of our life? So when
Yep.
somebody can feel that positivity coming from you, you're interested in them, like they're gonna flourish. All of us flourish under attention.
Mm-hmm.
90-year-olds to babies, and your interview subjects do too.
Yeah. Yeah. So speaking of subjects, you're meaning interview subjects.
Hmm.
You're dealing with people who are experts in their field. Uh, what have you found in interviewing? I don't know if it would be by industry or by role or maybe personality type or something. What have you found is different between those things? Like, is there a fundamental difference in trying to interview or to create content with somebody in finance as opposed to architecture and construction? Or do the differences lie more in their role within an organization as opposed to the industry that they work in? Have you seen any trends there?
Hmm. That's a great question. And for me, I'm going to say no, I don't bring a whole lot of different approach across industries. Based on role, yes. So, for example, our not myself, but somebody else in our firm just had to do an interview with the gentleman who is the president or CEO of Booz Allen Hamilton, which is like a huge federal government contractor, defense industry. Well, you better bet that for that interview, we're talking about prepare and all this, blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
She prepared for that interview, So obviously, if you're meeting with a senior executive, you are you're uber focused on make every single second of this interview valuable. I am not wasting this person's time. Whereas if you're meeting with somebody else, it may have a little bit more of like, oh, let's just chill and hang out and chew the fat vibe to the interview.
Gotcha. Well, that makes a lot of sense. Is that because their schedules are so demanding, or is it because there's a certain personality type that just kind of like won't tolerate nonsense at all, or a little bit of both?
Probably a little bit of both. Yes,
That's
their
fair.
schedules they're gonna be very heavily scheduled, so you have like your window to get in and get what you want.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, also like I said, if you're sitting up there in the interview asking them basic questions that you could have like just Googled yourself and known ahead of time,
Right.
it's like, why are we wasting my time with this?
Yeah.
Ask me second or third level questions about this topic.
Hmm. Shifting gears a little bit, looking at your website and the services you provide and the industries that you work with, there's a pretty broad set of industries that you focus on. So just to name a few: financial services, IT, healthcare, architecture, engineering, and construction, science and medicine. How did you get involved in such a broad set of verticals? And is there maybe more of an overlap there than somebody like me realizes?
Well, that's a great question. My background is I grew up working at CSC, which was at the time Computer Sciences Corporation. Now CSC doesn't exist anymore. It was bought by a subsidiary of HP, I think, several years ago, and it's called DXC now. So I spent the first 7 or 8 years of my career in a highly technical environment. It's like they say, you know, I'm not a doctor, but I play one on TV. I was not an IT specialist, but I wrote about IT and edited IT-related content. So that's kind of how I just got my start. It was always, and then my next big project was editing transportation-related research for the National Institute of Sciences. So I was, you know, the content was related to like the composition of concrete and the structural integrity of bridges and stuff. So for whatever reason, I just always gravitated toward that complex, more technical content. And I think the through line, to your question, the through line through all those industries, whether it's engineering and construction or healthcare or finance, is our customers are trying to explain a highly complex topic, often a complex product or solution offering, and they need our help to express that clearly and simply. So that's the through line of all our work, helping people explain complex topics clearly. And, you know, yes, for our writers, of course it helps as they work over and over in one industry to become more familiar with the lingo and the technologies and what have you that are at play. But that core skill, being able to absorb a lot of often heavily technical information and then translate that into clear content that somebody else, a regular person, can understand. That's the core skill set that everybody's bringing to bear.
So the big question then is, how do you do that? How do you summarize or distill, or maybe those aren't the right words. How do you make complex information clear to you've used the phrase, I think, like regular people or average people a few times. Is that primarily the audience that you're working with, like lay people, or
not? I say that, but not really. You know, our audience does tend to be more sophisticated buyers, I guess I might say. So if you're selling B2B services, you know, you're selling this new whatever network system, it's to somebody who kind of knows about like network IT and what have you.
But isn't necessarily a subject matter expert in you know, has been doing it for decades and knows all the ins and outs and all of that. But this is somebody who's maybe tasked with having to figure out the right way to go and is probably learning a lot along the way, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, in terms of how to do that, well, there's an app for that. Not really, but there is guidelines for that. You know, I don't know if you are have heard of the ISO, the International Organization for Standardization. It's a, obviously, international organization that develops standards for like everything you can think of. What how days of the calendar is recorded in different languages. Healthcare protocols, construction safety protocols, food preparation protocols. Well, they just came out with a new standard for plain language.
Really?
Which is a primer, really nice primer for how to explain anything complex in a clear and straightforward manner. So that's like a great starting place for anybody in the universe who's a writer.
Wow.
So that's a great resource for people to go to. You know, in answer to your question, otherwise, how do you do it? I mean, I feel like I have to, the challenge for me is, do I understand this topic, and am I writing about it in a way that like I can understand 100% as I write this? So it's almost like for the writer, it's getting your own head around the topic is the first challenge almost. And then again, being able to explain it. And, you know, they have the cliche about like, can you explain it in a way your grandmother would understand or in the way a 5-year-old would understand? Well, those may be cliches, but those are actually kind of legit ways to approach your writing, even if you're writing, again, for a sophisticated audience.
Yeah, it's hard to, it's so easy to slip into more complicated language and sentence structure, and especially once you start writing about something complicated or about something academic, it's very easy to adopt that sort of persona and feel like you have to write in a certain way. Like in the corporate world, if you're writing an email to, you know, to another business leader or a client or somebody, it's very easy to slip into formalities and all of this unnecessary stuff that just makes communication sort of ironically more difficult.
Yeah.
But it is, I don't think that many people are insulted by the idea of having something explained simply to them, you know, unless it's condescending. You can,
Right.
I suppose it's possible to cross the line into condescension, but
Yeah.
I don't think anybody says like that's too simple, like that's too easy for me to understand. But you definitely know when it's too hard.
Yes.
There's that. I know you mentioned the like explain like I'm 5 and how maybe that's a cliche, but that's also a that's a very, I don't know if it was popularized on like Reddit, but there's this acronym, you know, ELI5 that they use on Reddit to say like, hey, can somebody just explain this? Explain like I'm 5. So I didn't get that. Can you rephrase that? Can you simplify this for me? And in fact, I think there's even a whole subreddit devoted to explaining things to 5-year-olds, but they're all adults.
Right.
But it is, I mean, it works. And I mean, you're maybe not necessarily reducing your vocabulary to that of a 5-year-old, but as a mental framework of how do I just avoid using unnecessary words and overly technical language, when what I'm trying to do is like I have a really clear goal here. My goal in this piece of content is to get somebody to get a health screening or convince somebody that they need to, you know, consider this product or buy this product. And you really don't need to be, to get to that point, you don't really need to be overly technical. There's maybe a final step where you do need to look at highly technical information, like if you're trying to decide, you know, which, I don't even know, what would be like two different servers that have all kinds of different specs and things like that. Like at that point, you do want to look at the technical information. But until you get to that point where, you know, if you're just like, well, what do I need in terms of server technology, broadly speaking? Like what level of complication do I need as a small business to operate my office? Well, if you're at that point, then just having somebody sit down virtually and explain to you in a simple way, like these are the things that you should look at and these are the things you don't need to worry about. Having that kind of rubric for, we'll just keep it simple, is super helpful. Yeah.
And I think you hit on something that's important when you talk about using plain language or explaining things in a clear and simple way, or as though a 5-year-old could understand. People think that means you're dumbing it down, like server big, move lots of data. You know, that's not really what it's about. You're obviously using the terms of art relevant to that industry. You're describing clearly what, let's say, this server can do, but you're putting that in 15-word sentences instead of 60 or 80-word sentences, where the reader like gets lost. Because you're using these complicated terms of art, all the other words around that you're making simpler. So you're saying like use instead of utilize.
Right.
Thus instead of therefore. Manage rather than provide management of. So you're making all the
active
other
voice.
you're
shorter
using active
words.
voice, you're using simple sentence structures. Those are all, you're not writing paragraphs that are this long. You're writing short paragraphs with lots of headers and subheads so the reader can easily navigate the copy. We were talking about those ISO plain language guidelines. Let me see if I can remember these. The key things, the way that they define plain language is content that the reader can easily find what they need, understand what they find, and then use that for whatever their purpose is, to make a decision, like which server do I have. So it's also very interesting that those guidelines, it's not just about the writing, it's about the visual presentation of it as well. That's the whole part about, can the reader find what they need? And I'm sure in your world of like UX, that's like probably what you guys talk about all day long, is how can we structure these pages so that our users can get to where they want as easily as possible and not get lost in the navigation and stuff.
Yes. And I'm so glad that you brought this up, because this is something I specifically did want to talk about. So we design and build websites, but we focus on content-rich websites as opposed to transactional software or tools or things like that. And so a big part of what we do involves aspects of content strategy and some copywriting. And there's a term, a practice that has emerged over the past several years called content design, which is it would be maybe a little oversimplifying to say that it's the intersection of designing a page or a layout or whatever plus the content that goes into it. There's a little more to it than that. But its goal is to make the content work in exactly the way that you described it. Making it easy to scan, easy to find what you're looking for, easy to gather the takeaways and to act on whatever that content is supposed to do. Because all content at the end of the day is trying to do something. It has a purpose. It might be to convince you to sign up for a service, or make you feel something, or make you buy something, or make you do something. It all exists for a purpose, whether it's art or business or anything. And so content design is taking the words or the ideas and trying to express them visually, but also to create an experience out of them that works. So you mentioned the ISO standards of headings and subheads and short paragraphs and things like that, and it's all that kind of thing. Like, well, where do you put the headers on a page layout, and where do you insert? Where is it useful to have an infographic or some kind of illustration, or where do you create white space that leads to whatever kind of outcome that you want, whether it's greater understanding or a mental pause to kind of let something sink in before you move on to the next topic or idea. That's all part of what people are starting to call content design. So I'm glad you mentioned this, because one of the services you provide is design. And it's the design of this content. And you do things in both digital and analog print formats. And I'm curious if you've come across situations where you've had to present the same content in both, and if so, what were the big differences for you in presenting something in a digital, maybe that's kind of a strange word to use these days because it's so broad, but like a non-physical format, and
Yeah.
a physical format.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to be honest with you and say that our experience doing that is pretty limited because 90%, probably 95% of what we design is for print. And by print, I mean they're usually digital downloads. Again, whether
PDFs
it's your
and
white paper or fact sheet or case study, I doubt very few of them are probably actually ever printed. But it's your creative space is an 8.5 by 11 page, as opposed to a screen that can scroll and scroll. So when we do that, for example, if we're creating an industry report or something, as groovy as our design for the print piece might be, the translation of that onto the screen is usually, here's a headline, here's some text, here's a graphic, here's another headline, here's some more text, here's a graphic, and just keep scrolling till you're done.
But that's how people, we're so used to that, and I don't know when that happened exactly. I suspect that it was somewhere in the scroll wheel BlackBerry era that we became accustomed to, and I mean scroll wheel like on a mouse as well as the little nub thing on Blackberries. That we became accustomed to the idea of, well, we're just going to scroll as opposed to like page through.
Yeah.
Like there was that's a job for some technology anthropologist, but figuring out at what point did we experience this mental shift from paging to scrolling. But it's here. I mean, it's here, and it's everything that all the devices we have just reinforce this experience of scrolling. So creating
and I
a
would
single
argue
page.
that perhaps we even prefer that now. Like, for example, the medium that's called Issuu, ISSU, that you can use to view magazines or different documents. It creates a turning the page effect. Like, that drives me crazy. That's not how I want to view stuff online. Let me scroll through the story.
yeah. Like I have difficulty opening up PDFs and doing like a flip when they do like the 2-panel.
Yeah.
When it's like a 4-up layout or whatever. Like that feels strange to me on a screen because it makes me feel like, well, this is supposed to be like printed and bound and half sheets and all of that.
Now, there probably is a third way, and perhaps this is where I'm sure your agency, being as innovative as it is pushing into this. Like, every now and then you will see different ways that infographics are presented on the screen, where maybe you're like following branches, or the movement is vertical, or it's just truly a different way of presenting information. It's not scrolling, it's not turning a page. Like I said, it's branching or something different like that.
Yeah, there actually is. This got a lot of notice about, I think this maybe started about 10 years ago, and I don't see as much of it anymore, but they used to be called, what were they called? Interactives. So New York Times and others really kind of led the way with this because they had the resources to do this, but they would create, it was essentially an article, right? When you really strip it all down, it's a long form piece of writing about something. But they, through the scrolling experience, they would have like images or video fade in and appear, and then there would be like sort of a title card type experience that would lead you into the next chapter or whatever. And I do still see these from time to time, but they, now that you mention it, I don't see them as often. They were a really big deal for a while, and people really, and they're great. They're like really cool things to see. But I wonder if I'm just, I have nothing to back this up, but I wonder if the reason why they have disappeared a bit is that they're just so expensive to make, and they have to work on all kinds of different screens and shapes and sizes and touch devices and cursor devices. Like, how do you design a single experience for something like
Yeah.
that? It's almost like a museum. You'd go to a terminal in a museum and experience something, except you can do it on your laptop or phone. But that is, yeah, I think that was kind of the third wave for a while, and I don't know where exactly that went, but it's fascinating that despite all of these new ways of experiencing content that are really cool and can be super effective, we just always kind of go back to like text that you scroll through and short explainer videos, maybe little animations, and lots of PDFs. That there's just something, and I don't want to knock any of that, because if it works, it works. Like the whole point of what we all do as agencies, our job is to do what works.
Yeah.
And sometimes that means doing something new because it gets somebody's attention, and it's novel, so you're really like paying attention to the specific topic or whatever, and you're really engaged with it. But when that novelty wears off and it's replaced with something that's maybe more cumbersome or difficult to maintain or expensive to produce, then we wind up like, let's just, can we just make that a slide deck and export it as a PDF? And I don't think there's anything wrong with that necessarily, but it's just funny that like we're still kind of thinking about pages and flipping through things, and there's still just something very, I don't know, things are the way they are usually for a reason. I don't know if it just feels very human to do it that way, or if we just still haven't fully shed our like previous constructs of how content should be organized, and we still think in terms of like books and binding and pages and turning and flipping and all of that. But that's for an academic, I think, to research. But from a practical standpoint, these are just the things that work, right? So we do them.
Well, that you bring up a really interesting point. I mean, on the one hand, you could easily argue that, creating content as PDFs, as downloadable PDFs, is old school, that's boring. But like you said, it continues to work. And I download PDFs of the stuff all the time. I'm like, ooh, a free ebook on blah, blah, blah. I want that. And then
we
you
make
get
them.
it, and it's
People download them from our website.
Free.
Yeah,
and then I have
works.
it as a resource that's mine.
Yep.
And to your point of pages, stuff that's really important to me that I actually want to study and review or do something with, I also usually wind up printing out on my printer and sitting at the, conference table or whatever and working through it with the highlighters, with a pen. When it's something that's really important, I still go to paper rather than, obviously I could do that in any number of platforms online, but I want to see it, touch it, feel it.
Yes. I do the same thing, and it's usually, and I think that the key word you used is important. I would say the same thing about the work that we do. So like you, I'm sure, write a lot of emails. We do a lot of stuff on Slack, and sometimes we're like write a lot of documentation on wiki pages, whether that's client communications or processes or whatever. I mean, there is a ton of writing that goes on that has nothing necessarily to do directly with a client deliverable.
Yeah.
But just all this background stuff that you have to do to run an agency, run a company, manage a team, whatever. But like the really critical stuff, like a proposal, I absolutely print that out. Like I just can't, I have to go away from this. I'm gesturing at the screen. I have to get away from this for a moment and sit down with a pen and actually touch and feel and write and flip through things. And also, those proposals, they get delivered as a PDF.
Right.
They always do.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder when the PDF will go away once and for all. I don't know if it will. That might be like a weird... I mean, how many things have survived like eons of human ingenuity and evolution, and like there's basic machines, there's the wheel, there's the lever and the screw and the the fulcrum and all of that. And there's the PDF.
So the PDF is the new wheel, I think is what you're saying.
Let's not reinvent it. That's right. I'm curious, just as a because I run into this quite a bit. We work with fewer industries than you perhaps, but I see a big difference between them. So we work primarily with higher ed, nonprofit, and publishing. And there's a pretty big difference between how each of those industries operate and how we operate with them. The biggest being advertising-driven publishing, which used to be a major focus of ours, and over the years we've been focusing more on things like trade publications, membership or nonprofit-driven publishing, things like that, public media. But there, of course, back when we were doing a lot of that ad-driven work, that's a totally different business model. The thing that we're helping them, the thing that we're building the tools to help them create their content is their product, and they are selling that for impressions and for attention, for ads to the people who ultimately pay them, and to a lesser degree the subscribers who pay for it.
Yeah.
So I experienced some big differences between those industries. I'm curious that from your perspective, working as an outsourced content creator, do you see big differences between the many industries you work with, or do they really all kind of converge on this notion of, well, this is just highly complicated and technical stuff, and what we're good at Dragonfly is distilling that into something that makes sense to the majority of people?
Yeah. I think, to be honest with you, Todd, everybody's doing the same thing across industries. Like you said, they all need explainer pieces written, white papers breaking down complicated topics, state of the industry reports, annual reports, fact sheet, back to our PDFs, front and back fact sheets, breaking down the details of a certain product or a certain offering. So, maybe those companies are very likely doing other different things in different parts of their world, but that kind of like helping people create their thought leadership collateral, that particular window into the businesses is very similar across all of our different industries. So like your medical device manufacturer is creating an employee newsletter. Your finance company is creating an employee newsletter. Your big, multinational, this is not a B&B company, but we work for, this is one of our most fun customers. We work for Grupo Bimbo, which is a Mexican multinational that is the owner of Takis and Entenmann's and Auntie Anne's and Sara Lee and Boboli and like every other bread product you can imagine.
I do love Takis.
I love Takis, right. They create an employee newsletter, so it's like we see these same all of these companies are creating the same vehicles. That's what we just step in to help them with those.
Got it. So it really is sort of the perfect mix of the vehicles, the patterns, what kinds of things your clients need to produce, whether they're annual reports, employee newsletters, fact sheets, etc.
Yeah.
And they're supplying the raw data and information, whether that's calorie information or medical specifications or whatever. And you take that information, you put it into this vehicle, you make it make sense, you make it simple, you make it clear, you make it impactful.
Yes.
And you send it out. That's such an interesting differentiation. The world of to kind of get into the very nerdy world of agencies for a moment. One of the things that I think we all run into constantly is the idea of differentiation. How are you? How's your agency different from the one next door or the one across the hall at a conference or whatever? And in the software web development design-ish world, there's a lot of like sort of wisdom, but I'm going to put wisdom in quotes. Sort of like this idea that you have to differentiate according to industry and a very specialized use case. And I understand how that works for like small agencies who can't just say, yeah, we'll kind of build a website for whoever for whatever purpose. If you're very, very, very small, you can't do that. Like you cannot compete against the many other agencies that actually do specialize in a specific agency or in a specific industry. So in the world of agencies, there's a strong emphasis on the need to differentiate, meaning make your agency the clear choice to a potential client because you do specifically the thing that they need, or you have exactly the kind of experience or skill set or breadth of services or whatever it is that almost make them want to stop looking entirely and just choose you and run with it, right? And in the software world, because there are a lot of web design and development software companies out there, the common wisdom seems to be that there should be a combination of focusing on verticals and use cases, which makes sense if you're a very small agency because you can't do everything. And if you try to present yourself that way and say, yeah, we can do this and we can do that, and what do you need? Sure, it's less compelling than somebody coming along and saying, oh yeah, we've worked with your 3 biggest competitors or peers, and we know exactly how you operate, and we're going to build you something that's specific to you while also bringing in all of this knowledge that we've developed over the years from having worked with people just like you.
Right.
And that's super valuable to clients, right?
Yeah.
And in your case, it seems that the specialization or the differentiation that you've developed is taking complicated technical content and making it make sense and putting it in very specific vehicles that are common across all of these industries, whether they are annual reports, proposals, employee newsletters, right? Is that something that you deliberately intended to do? Like, did you set out to differentiate in that way, or is that just something that happened organically?
To be honest with you, I think it happened accidentally. Like I said, my background was handling more technical content. So those were the industries that I got excited about when opportunities came up to work with them. We get a lot of our business through going to industry conferences. So, so I would go to the big conference for architecture, engineering, and construction people. So I think it was a little bit of an accident versus the more technical, more complex content is what I naturally gravitated towards.
So your strategy of going to these industry-specific conferences, do you speak at them? Do you go to different booths and just kind of do the networking thing? Like, what's your technique for getting into a room of these people and making yourself known?
Sure. Well, I do have a secret plan, Todd, if you'd like to hear about it.
I would love, yes, I love secret plans.
Okay, I'll break it down.
Yeah.
Level 1 is simply attending the conference. And you meet with people, chat, maybe get to know some people that way. Awesome. Level 2 is you exhibit at the conference. So in other words, you would have a trade show booth. It's nice for us because guess what? If we go to a architecture, engineering, and construction conference, everybody else is selling hammers and crap. We're probably the only people saying, do you need somebody to write your stuff?
Yeah. Yes.
So, so that's a niche for us. Like we kind of stick out as, writers,
And they want like to talk with you because
for us, everybody else is doing technical stuff and we're the writers.
And they're so sick of talking to all of these other people that are trying to sell them hammers.
Right.
This is at least, we keep, novelty is something that we've circled around in this conversation. This is just another example of novelty and humans being attracted to that. So like, well, they're going to want to talk to you because they're like, oh, this is a completely different conversation. I've already had 10 conversations about hammers today. I get to talk to somebody about writing content. Like that's not something I really do. Cool. Different conversation. Let's do this.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's level 2. Level 3 is indeed speaking, becoming a speaker at different events. And because then I think people also start to see you not just as a vendor, but as a industry expert, if you will. I'm always like super rigorous about, well, whenever I'm at a conference, I am like never salesy. I'm just like, here's, for example, I just spoke about the plain language standards to a couple different organizations. Here's these tools. Here's how you can use them. Go forth and, multiply this into your documents. You don't need me to do it, but
they won't.
Of course, the end goal is I
Yes.
do want them to be like, yeah, that's awesome, and I do want her to do it.
Yes.
So that's level 3. Level 4 is if you get on the board of those organizations.
Ah.
And then you are like, that's been, that just takes it to a whole nother level where you are actively contributing to that industry, volunteering your time, becoming like a member of that community. So that's Sam's secret 4-step method for optimizing industry involvement.
That's Sam's secret method for optimizing industry involvement. I'm reminded of somebody, another web development agency who I had sort of a similar conversation with them about like, well, how do you do events? Like, what's your, because that used to be our primary marketing strategy was event based. And we shifted to more content oriented marketing, and that's worked well for us, but it's also not an either or. Like it's a bit of an and, right? You need to kind of do everything. And so I've been, especially now, kind of post pandemic, thinking about how do we re-enter the world of events? What does that really look like in a serious way? And kind of rethinking how we do that. There's one agency that I came across that actually they create an event for their clients. I think they've done it once. I think they say they want to do it every year, but they've done it once. And I forget if it was in person or virtual or whatever, but it kind of doesn't matter because you wind up, you are the sole presenter essentially, and you're inviting all your clients to come present with you. And you then record all of this stuff and you make it available in perpetuity. Like it's brilliant. It's extremely time consuming, right? It's a major undertaking to do something like that. But wow, what a fantastic idea. So I wonder if that's like a step 4.5 or 6 or something in that plan.
I think you're right. I think that's the next.
That was cool.
Level.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. This has been super interesting. If people want to learn more about Dragonfly or get a hold of you, what are the best ways to do that?
Sure. Well, they can just go to our website, of course, dragonflyeditorial.com. Anybody is free to reach out to me personally. It's just sam@dragonflyeditorial.com. Happy to talk to anybody about any questions to do with writing, editing, design. Love talking to people, love hearing from people.
And speaking of talking to people about writing, I cannot help but notice the conspicuous 17th edition of the Chicago Manual. And on mine is somewhere over there.
I see some orange back there.
Yeah, it's somewhere back there.
Some blue.
Yep. I love style guides. Previous career as an editor is something I still can't shake, but it's always fascinating to talk with you and the work that you're doing.